Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Yogita Karthik and I'm here to share with you today my views on civil services as a career. Um, before we actually start off on the session, I would like to first and foremost thank NPTEL for this opportunity to be here with you on this platform and to share my views with you regarding the civil services. The civil services, as most people know it, has a few visible faces and there's not much known about it because government is not a much opted career in these days where the private sector is booming. So before I actually get off into the start of the presentation, I would like to maybe give you a brief introduction about myself. I belong to the 2002 batch of the civil services and I belong to a service called the Indian Defence Accounts Service. My department, that is a Defence Accounts Department, comes under the finance wing of the Ministry of Defence. Now, basically, what my department does, it manages the defense budget. When I say manages the defense budget, we basically look into any kind of payments made out of the defense budget. We offer financial advice on how to spend the money. We are also involved in the accounting and auditing of this money. We render these services to all the departments under the Ministry of Defense, like the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Border Roads, the Ordnance Factories Organization, to name a few. So now you must be wondering that I have told you that I belong to the Indian Defence Account Service. So I am not an IAS officer. So how do I belong to the civil services? Well, uh, the most common knowledge that people have is that the IAS officers and the IPS officers constitute the civil services. But far be from it, there are a plethora of services which come under the civil services. It is just that the IAS and IPS are more of a public face and they are more visible to the public because of the nature of work that they carry out. So I will be starting off with what comprises the civil services, who they are and what they do. Now you will see here I have a picture of Mr. J. Radhakrishnan, who is known for his relief work in the 2004 tsunami in the districts of Nagapattinam and Tanjavur. Now he gained worldwide appreciation. He was invited in the United States Department of Education for a series of lectures and he has won various awards for this relief work that has been carried out. So you can understand the enormity of the responsibility that the civil services carry. As we go through the lecture, I will be able to tell you in detail what exactly are these functions that we perform. Now, who is a civil servant? Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, when he was inducting the first batch of civil servants, said that we are the steel frame of India. The civil services is not a concept that is new to India. It has been prevalent during the British Raj, but it gained a different form and after that means post independence, and it's gained in importance across years, and the functions that these services have to do are doing has diversified to a large extent. Now, who would I categorize as a civil servant? A person who is basically advising and implementing these government policies. They are involved in the day-to-day functioning of the government. You will find civil servants placed across all ministries of the government, so that everyday running of the government is taken care of by these civil servants. And essentially they are a link between the masses and the government, because this is required, because when you frame a policy, you cannot frame a policy which is delinked from the masses. So any civil servant in any ministry would essentially be performing these basic functions, but dependent on the ministry they are placed in and the kind of role that they are performing at that point of time, their functions might differ. Now you can see at the bottom I have categorized it into three. The civil services is the All India services and the central services, and we also have the state administrative services. While I will not be talking about the state administrative services, I will be talking about the All India services and the central services. Now the induction into the All India services and the central services is done through the Union Public Service Commission. Now this is a body constituted under an Article 320 of the Constitution, and any kind of entry into the government at the level of a Group A officer is conducted by the UPSC. Now the UPSC conducts very many number of competitive exams, of which the civil service examination is one, of which the civil services, there are basically 20 odd services under these civil services, and they are categorized into the All India services and the central services. Now what constitute the All India services and what constitute the central services, and what is the difference between these two? When we look at it, the All India services basically comprise of the IAS, that is the Indian Administrative Service, the Indian Police Service and the Indian Forest Service. Why are they termed an All India service? It is because when they get their posting, their work is restricted to a cadre. They call it a cadre. It's basically restricted to a state. Suppose as an IAS officer, I am posted as I choose. You are given an option to choose your cadre, but you also get an allotment based on your rank. So if I am allotted to the Tamil Nadu cadre, it means that for the rest of my career, I will be carrying out functions within the state. So my work would involve only with the work of the state. This is true of the IAS and the IPS and the Indian Forest Service. Now, just because they work in the state doesn't mean they don't get an opportunity to do other things. There is a possibility of going on deputation to the central ministries wherein they can do a different kind of work. But essentially their work from the start of their career till their end would be restricted to that state. Now what comprise the central services? I'm sure of these you might have heard about a few, like the Foreign Service or the Revenue Service, which are kind of better known among the rest of the services. There are other services like Indian Accounts and Audit and Account Service, the Defence Account Service, to which I belong, Indian Customs Service, Postal Service, Ordnance Factories, Defence Estates. These are just to name a few. Now these central services have an all India transfer liability, in the sense that they can be posted to any part of India wherein their offices exist. They might continue doing the same work or a different work depending upon the role in which they are placed. So these central services, since they have a pan-India liability, they will work across the country. Now the Indian Foreign Service is a slight exception to the rest of the services, in the sense their career is mostly based out of India, wherein they start off as a second or a first secretary and work their way up to an ambassador in the High Commission, in whichever country they are placed in. They do come back and work within the government in the Ministry of External Affairs, wherein they may continue to do or help in the running of that particular department. Now, I would like to explain a little about each service. I will not be able to touch upon every single service that is there, because the work that is carried out by these services are completely different from each other, and they are generally restricted to their area of functioning. So I might not be able to touch in detail upon it, but I can give you a few pointers on what it is that they do in order to give you an idea of what the civil services are. Now, if we look at the responsibilities of civil services, starting with the IAS, which is the most visible face, an IAS officer in his first posting gets posted as a district magistrate or as a collector. You can imagine the kind of huge responsibility that is thrust upon the officer in his very first posting. He would be in charge of the complete district. He would be involved in implementing the government policies and the administration of the district, including the revenue administration, basically. And the IAS officers work their way up. They might spend maybe around an average of 10 to 12 years in the field, where they will hold the post of the collector. And this is a very crucial phase for them, because that is where they actually get to implement the policies and touch people's lives. Now, as their career progresses, they would work their way into their ministries, where they will be involved in the framing of policies. I think everybody knows about the chief secretary of a particular state. These are generally the IAS officers who hold the post. Mostly the secretaries, the highest post that we reach in the government under the civil services is a secretary to the government of India. Now, most of the IAS officers as secretaries head various ministries. You must have heard about health secretary, finance secretary, right? So every ministry is headed by these IAS officers. Now, if you move to the Indian Police Service, I think most of us have seen through movies or what we read in the paper as to what it is that the police do, essentially maintaining law and order, crime prevention, detention, and maintaining order during a crisis. This maintaining order during a crisis, you would have seen now in the prevailing situation where the lockdown is being implemented, the kind of services that the police are doing for the country. I mean, it's an immense work that they are doing, and it's really great that they are able to achieve the kind of law and order without resorting to too much violence. Now, the Indian Foreign Service, these people are generally posted outside India, wherein they represent the face of India, right? So their job is to enhance the diplomatic relations with other countries. They improve the trade. They sign a lot of economic treaties or bilateral political. They promote cultural relationships. This is essentially the work of the Foreign Service. When we come to the Indian Revenue Service, we have two categories there. We have an Indian Revenue Service and we have an Indian Customs and Central Excise. The difference between these two is one of them deals with direct taxes and the other with the indirect taxes. Now, the IRS is something that most of us would have heard about, because we all file our taxes and we do get communication from the department. So their job is basically to collection of revenue, monitoring, and it's ensuring it gets collected in the proper manner from all people, because that's where the revenue of the government comes from, right? So the money that they collect goes into implementing various government policies. So they play a very important role as that. And you would have seen maybe in a lot of movies where the IRS officers go as investigators and they conduct a raid, right? So those are generally the functions of the IRS officers. Now, the customs officer, people might have experienced maybe in the airport or other places. So they prevent smuggling, and they are also involved in the assessment of indirect taxes. Now, the Indian Audits and Accounts Service, I think more popularly, if I say the C&AG, most people would know, because the C&AG is the head of the Indian Audits and Accounts Service. What they do is they audit the accounts of the union and the state governments and the public sector organizations. You would have seen a lot of reports being tabled in the parliament based on the auditing work that they carry out. There are some major issues that have been unearthed by this department, which is actually a tool to help improve the functioning of the government. Now, I have clubbed a lot of services into the account service, wherein my service also falls, that is the Defense Account Service. You can see defense accounts, and then you can see railway accounts, and you can see civil accounts, and then you can see P&T accounts, right? Now, these services basically manage the budget of that particular ministry. Now, if I talk about railway accounts, the railway budget, right? What is spent out of the budget, how they maintain the accounts, how they audit the whatever the account, the money that has been spent, and also how to spend the money. Now, how to spend the money, the financial advice is a major role in the government. When you are offering advice on how to spend the money, you are basically signing away government money. So there's a lot of responsibility that is attached to it. And till recently, I was doing the financial advice role with the DRDO, right? That is a Defense Research and Development Organization, which is also a part of the Ministry of the Defense. Now, other than this, you can see some other services like the Postal Service. You can see that the Postal Service has also been playing a very important role during this COVID lockdown, because they have been instrumental in transporting essential goods. Their services are still open, and a lot of grassroots level reach is there for the post offices because of the huge infrastructure that they have already established. So they have been doing a lot of work with regard to the lockdown. That you can see ordnance factories. These ordnance factories are basically factories which develop arms, ammunitions, and other equipment for the services. Now, these ordnance factories are also playing a major role during this COVID lockdown by manufacturing a lot of medical kits that are required for the people who are working at the ground level with these COVID patients. You can also see defense estates, information service, railway personnel, railway traffic, etc. Like I told you, there are about 20 odd services, and I might not be really able to talk in detail about each of these services. The only thing I would like to say is you can see from the services the huge diversity of work that each of these services carry out. Now, even within each of these services, there are various roles that a person plays as they move from the beginning level to a place where they will probably head the department towards the end of their career. So now that you've got a fair idea about what the civil services are, you might be wondering, why should I choose civil service as a career? What is in it for me, and what do I get out of it, right? Here you can see Mr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, who is a current foreign minister, right? He was erstwhile foreign secretary. That means he belonged to the Indian Foreign Service, right? Like I told you, by the time you reach the end of your career, you are designated as secretaries to the ministries, and he retired as the foreign secretary from the Ministry of External Affairs. Now, as to why civil services as a career, now everybody has a lot of reasons for choosing your own career. It might depend on what your passion is, what is it you're looking for in life, and what you term as success in your life. I'm just going to enumerate a few that I felt was important from my point of view. There might be people who have different opinions as to why you should choose the services as such, but from my point of view, these are a few of the things that I have put in. Now, the first thing I would like to talk about is the opportunity to combine personal ambition with societal welfare. Now, to give back to society is something that I think most of us want to do. Maybe we don't do it because we are not either given the opportunity to do it, or we don't have the infrastructure to do it, or we don't have the resources to do it. So we all hesitate in actually giving back to society. But this is one job where you will be able to contribute right from the start of your career, and you can see visible changes around you based on what it is that you do. At the same time, your personal ambition, if you want to be a very successful person, I think it's a perfect balance of able to match your personal ambition with your societal welfare. I already talked about the diversity of work, because that's something I think most of us as working people look forward to. You can't, nobody likes to do the same stuff across years. I mean, it's just a mundane repetition. I don't think any of us want to do it. So this civil services offers a lot of challenges. It gives you an opportunity to tackle problems, solve them. A lot of decision making is involved in this, a lot of responsibility, a lot of accountability, and it gives you a lot of a leadership role, right from the beginning. If you can imagine being posted as a collector, the kind of leadership that you have to execute is huge. Now, like I said, you contribute to the decision making process in the country, right? The country is something that we all feel very patriotic about, and we all feel that we need to do something for our country. Then this is the right way to get into the services and to execute what you need to do. Participate in societal reformation. Like I said, you can see visible changes in the society around you. You can improve the living of people to a large extent. There are multiple examples of officers who have made a huge difference to the lives around them. I can talk about a few, like Ms. Supriya Sule, who brought out plastic-free Ooty. There is Mr. Armstrong Pame, who built 100 kilometers of road through crowdfunding, not just, it was not government resources, through crowdfunding. And there are, I can give you innumerable examples of this, but the opportunity to do it and the infrastructure and the resources that are at your disposal to do this are huge, and it will enable you to actually make a change in society. Like I said, it's a challenging job. Right from the very first post that you occupy, irrespective of the service you are in, you will be a leader there. People will look up to you. They look up to you to take decisions, and they will follow your example. You lead by example in the services. So that is something that you can definitely look forward to. If I have to move to a little more mundane things as to why I should join the services, first one is a job security. You know, with any government service, any government job, you hold your job unless there is some kind of a gross misconduct till the age of retirement, that is 60, as fixed by the central government. Status, Yes, as a part of the civil service society, there's a huge amount, it's a huge status symbol for a lot of people who think that it is important to be seen in society as a big shot, or somebody who can really help or reach out to others. So a lot of people associate a lot of importance to roles being held like this. Power, authority, yes, of course, because when you are in the services, the kind of power you wield, whether it be financial power or the power to take decisions or the power to execute things, is really huge. But like you say, with great power comes great responsibility. So it has to be a balance of both power and responsibility. You can see assured career progression there. What I meant by an assured career progression is, most of us start off, there are certain grades laid down through which we progress through as the years go by. Now this movement or a promotion from one grade to the other is more or less a very constant thing. It is based upon your performance. As in the private sector, you have performance appraisals. It is based on that. But I would think that somebody who's cleared the civil service is definitely capable of performing. So you see very few instances of people actually not making the cut to the next promotion. Now the rate at which you move, it might be different in the different services. But if you enter service at an age, and you will be more or less able to chart where you will reach by the end of your career, provided that nothing major goes wrong. So that kind of an assured career progression, you know where you will be in a few years, and you will also know what is the role, what is the responsibility to execute. So you can always be prepared for it. Now the last one where I put it is salary. Now there was a time when government servants were underpaid. People didn't want government jobs, but they took it only for the security part of it. So the society has been going through phases. There was a phase when government jobs were really attractive, right? And then it underwent a change with the introduction of IT. IT became more popular as a career for many people, and then it's changed yet again now, because with the introduction of the 6th pay commission, I would say the salaries are now on par, or maybe if you are taking the first rung where you're joining, even better than what the private sectors can offer you. Right? And now I'm not going to talk about the perks that many people think are associated with a government servant. I will only go as far as to say that for certain services, given the nature of the work that they execute, there are certain I wouldn't call it perks. I would say there are certain facilities that are extended to them in order to carry out this work, right? But having listed all this, to me, the most compelling reason to be in the government is the opportunity to be the change. Now, what is our reaction when we go to a government office? Most of our experiences in government offices have not really been so good, and we come away feeling very disheartened, and we think, why don't they change? Why can't they change? Why is nobody doing anything about it? But why should anybody do anything about it? Why not you? As a person, if you think you need the change, then you need to be the change, right? The government needs young people who are bright, smart, who have the will to change the system, and it is you who can actually make the change in the system. So the opportunity to be the change is huge. Now I'm not belittling people who have done a lot of things otherwise, a lot of NGOs who have done a lot of good work and who have made a difference in people's life. But I'm only saying that with the government machinery behind you, it leads to a kind of sustainability. Anything that you do is sustainable. You have immense resources at your disposal, and you will also be able to execute it in a much better manner. So if you really think that things need to change in this society, in this government, then it needs to be you who's doing it. And the civil services is the perfect opportunity for you to do this. Now, having listed all the pros of the service, I'm not going to tell you there are no cons, because as with any other job, it has its own drawbacks, right? Now, while the IAS and IPS look very glamorous to you, we all feel proud seeing the work that they're doing. Their working hours are abysmal, right? They are supposed to be on duty 24/7, no weekends, right? So, and in times of crisis, you can see that they are at the forefront of handling things. I personally know a lot of friends who have been handling the COVID crisis, who are not able to, talk to their children, who have been staying away in camps and trying to do a lot of stuff. So, like I said, with power comes responsibility. It's not just that, it's also the kind of working hours that you put in. It is a drain on you and on your family, but you need to balance both your work and your life. So that's where your skill comes in. And also, as with any service, whether it is IAS, IPS, whether it's IRS, there is a lot of external pressure that comes into you to influence your sphere of work. Now, how you stand up to it is again another a battle by itself. There are a lot of officers who, for having stood up, have been transferred multiple times throughout their career. I have known of people who in the span of 9 years have been transferred 22 times or 23 times, but that is a risk that you should be willing to take if you want to actually be the change in any particular place. Right, and as I've told you, with the central services, there is a pan-India liability. So generally, you might spend 5 or 6 years in a certain place, and you will be constantly moving throughout India, or even if you are in the administrative service, you'll be moving within the state. So the kind of dislocation to your family and maybe your education of the children might be there, although the government has provided resources for this, right? As of beyond this, I don't see any further cons with why you should not join the services. And I think above everything, the difference that you can make to people's life, to society, and to governance, to improving the way things are being run in the government is a huge opportunity. And if for bright young people with better ideas, right, this is the ideal place to be. Now, having told you all this, I also need to tell you how you get into the civil services. I think the person you see on the slide is a very popular person and needs no introduction, so I'm not going to talk about her. I am just going to tell you how is it that the exam takes place and what is required to write this exam, right? So, like I mentioned before, this is through the UPSC. So, I'm not touching the state services. The state services, each state has their own public service commission, like the Tamil Nadu Public Service Commission or the Karnataka Public Service, which conducts the exams for the people who want to take those exams. I will only be talking about the UPSC civil service examinations, although UPSC conducts various other competitive exams, like maybe to get into the DRDO, there is an exam, you have an Indian Engineering Service, you have a statistical service, you have an economic service. If you go to the UPSC website, you will see a huge list of services and exams that they offer. So do take the time to check out the UPSC website, which might give you an idea where your passion lies, so you can choose the exam accordingly. So I will now be talking only about the civil services examination. Okay, now the basic thing for any examination is who is eligible, right? The first and foremost criteria, yes, you need to be a citizen of India, but there are certain relaxations given for services other than the IAS, IPS and the foreign service, where you can be a subject of Nepal, Bhutan, right? There are certain other relaxations which are there. In case anybody is interested, the UPSC publishes a notification with regard to this. So it will give you the complete details of who is eligible and who is not. Now, to write the civil services examination, you need to have attained 21 years of age and not cross 32. Now, like I said, again, there are certain relaxations yet again available with regard to the age, and this is available in the notification. I am not touching upon this, but with regard to the OBCs or the SC, STs, there are certain further relaxations which are laid down for them to take. The age relaxations also applied to ex-servicemen or defense personnel who have been invalidated out of due to injuries. There are a lot of relaxations which are laid down. So if one needs to have a look, like I said, go back to the UPSC notification. With regard to educational qualification, there has always been doubt, I have done engineering, I have done my medicine. Is it, can I take the exam or is it worth it? Let me say it depends again on your passion. Personally, there are a lot of my batchmates who have even come from the IIT and they are happy doing what they are doing here. I know a lot of doctors who have come in even after all those years of hard work and they are happy doing what they are doing. So the civil services are generally, they are generalists, right? We are not people who work in the same field as in which you have been educated. For example, I have done my master's in psychology and yet I work in an account service. Now the educational qualification has no bearing on the service that you will get into or on the work. The work we do, we learn as we go, and our expertise comes out of the years of training and of the 2 years of basic training that we get before we actually get into our jobs. Now, how many times can I write the exam? As of now, the criteria is 6, right, for general category and 9 for the OBCs. There are no restrictions for the SCs and the STs. So I think see, there are a lot of people, I'm not going to say it's an easy exam. There are a lot of people who take multiple attempts to do it. There are people who clear in the first attempt, then it all just depends on you finally, right? Then the last criteria is the physical fitness. When I talk about physical fitness, after the interview is done, I will talk about it. We do get tested physically. There are certain relaxations available to the differently abled, maybe the in terms of visual handicaps or auditory handicaps, but it yet again depends on the kind of service that you're going to opt for and what is required to execute the job in that particular service. Now this again, like I said, go back to the UPSC notification in order to find out exactly what the relaxations available for each of these criteria are. Now, I have given you indicative timelines. Now, this year, because of the COVID, yet again, the timelines are slipping. But on a general note, if you see, by February, the notification by UPSC is given for the preliminary examinations. The preliminary examination is an objective type examination which is held in the June of that year. The results are out by August. Then those who have cleared this preliminary exam will be able to take the mains. Right now the main results come out, then once again those who have cleared the mains will be called in for a personality test, and the physical fitness along with the personality test happens and your final results are out by May. As you can see, it takes about a year for the entire examination process to finish, right? So it is 1 year of total hard work that you need to put in order to actually clear this examination. Now, what the preliminary exam comprises of, there is as of now only one paper, that is a general studies paper, which is, like I told you, it's an objective type of examination. There has been a committee set up which is probably looking into how the syllabus has changed, because what we wrote in 2002 was yet again different and what is now there is different, and there might be changes. But as on date, this is what the pattern is. There are 2 papers that you need to take in this. Like I've listed, exam 1, these are what is covered, and exam 2, right? Exam 2 is basically more like a qualifying paper, right? So if you get 33%, you qualify for it. And the cutoff for the exam 1 is fixed by the UPSC. Now, how do you decide what the cutoff is on a rough scale, right? Approximately maybe 10 to 11 lakhs write the exam in any given year, right? And there are a certain number of vacancies that are notified by the UPSC. Now, all the services might not indicate vacancies in every year, and the number of vacancies every year will change as per the requirement of that particular department. So, it would depend on the number of vacancies. This year the notification is for approximately I think 796, but the vacancies can vary from when I got in, the vacancy was 420. Now it's 796. There are some years where the number of vacancies go up to 1000 or 1500 also. So it would depend on a year-to-year basis, and this cutoff will be fixed. It's more like a percentile system. There's no there's no minimum mark basically. So what I've indicated there is that based on the number of vacancies, 12 to 13 times the number of vacancies is what will be admitted to the mains. Now the marks scored in the preliminary exam will not be counted for determining your order of merit. Now this order of merit takes importance because that is how you get your placement into the services. It also happens by choice, but also it is based on the order of merit, right? Now if you clear the preliminary exam, you move on to the mains. There are two qualifying papers in this, that is the English and one Indian language of your choice, which is prescribed under Schedule 8 of the Constitution. Okay, right? There are the list of maybe I think 22 languages which are listed. You can write any one of the languages from there. And you will have to choose one subject that you will take, wherein you will have two papers under that subject. Now this subject need not necessarily be the subject that you graduated from. There are a lot of engineering graduates who shift to the humanities paper because humanities is a much more popular choice where the civil services are concerned. Right? I am just giving you 3-4 here, but there are again another 20 odd subjects that you can choose from to write the exam in. Now the general studies, I am not even touching upon the syllabus because the syllabus is so vast and extensive that I cannot list it here, but it is across 4 papers. It covers everything from history to geography to Indian polity, maybe current affairs, general science, and you talk about climate change, anything and everything under the sun. You think about it, it's there, but all this syllabus is extensively listed once again in the UPSC notification. Now all these exams except the English qualifying one can be written in any of the Indian languages, like I said, which is listed in the 8th schedule. It need not necessarily only be in English. Even the preliminary exam where it's a multiple choice, the questions will be listed both in Hindi and in English. Now in these papers you can choose any Indian language to write from. Essay is again a paper that you will have to, it's a separate paper by itself. It will be on any topic of current interest. Now other than these two qualifying papers, the marks scored in the other papers will be taken to count your order of merit. And the final step is the interview. Just like in any other interview, it is not to test your intellectual capacity. I mean in the sense of what your bookish knowledge is. It's more of how you are able to handle situations. What is your decision solving? What are your analytical skills? What are your social traits? How are you able, do you go interact well with people? These are the kinds of things that they would look for in an interview. In an interview, they also look at what are the kind of hobbies you have, whether your interests are varied, right? So if you have any hobbies, so do keep on doing them, because lots of people have had their interviews solely based only on their hobbies. There are people who have poetry interest, maybe an hour or so people have discussed just poetry and come back, right? So an interview is not a testing of your educational skills at any point of time. Now, how do you prepare for the UPSC? Now, see, the people I have put into my slides do not belong only to the IAS. Like you have seen IPS and Foreign Service. I think yet another famed personality, Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. I think the name is familiar to most people. He belonged to the Economic Service, right? And there are a lot of other people who belong, like my batchmate, there is an Indian Forest Service, Mr. Sanjeev Chaturvedi. He is a recipient of the Raman Magsaysay Award, right? Most people will know him as a whistleblower in the Ames case. So irrespective of the service you are in, I know it's everybody's cherished dream to be an IAS officer. That's why everyone writes the exam. But irrespective of the service you are in, there's a lot that you can do and there's a lot that you can contribute to the country. Now, how do you prepare for the UPSC? Like I said, it's one of the most competitive exams. There are people who have gotten in the very first attempt. There are people who have given multiple attempts and yet not gotten. The only thing I would like to say is that this exam is not a representation of what you are or what you're capable of, right? It is just like any other competitive exam. You need to know how to tackle the paper, what to write, what to prepare. The only problem with this exam is it covers, and the syllabus is extensive, right? People generally start off a year before the prelims. There are people who have started 6 months before the preliminary exam and managed to clear it, right? But on an average, if you look at it, so you need to start off at least a year before the prelims. And so if you look at the total time period that you're going to spend, it's about 2 years, right? Right, the year before the prelims and the entire year that we have seen, the indicative times, it takes about a year. So 2 years of study is what is required to make the cut in this examination. Like I said before, humanities are preferred by candidates, even though you do have maths, you do have an engineering subject, but the humanities are much more easier to score. So people do prefer the humanities, but then again, this is a matter of personal choice. Whichever subject you're most comfortable in, I would suggest that you spend more time on those, choosing that subject, and please look at the syllabus before you choose the optional subject that you want to write the exam in. Generally, this is of the any degree level. The syllabus is generally of the degree level, but it might not be something that you have done during your regular course of studying. So it would be advisable to have a look at the syllabus before you actually take the plunge. Like I said, it is important to be a well-rounded personality. Whether you are interested in sports or you have any other hobbies, please keep them cultivated, because these are all things that they look for in a civil servant. They want a well-rounded personality. They don't want somebody who knows only what's in the books, right? So please keep yourself updated, keep yourself studying about current affairs. Current affairs is another very important subject, and you would be expected to talk about, whether it be economic affairs or whatever it is, you need to be aware of what's happening in the country and what's happening in the world. So do read up on a lot of magazines. Make sure you read the paper. The most preferred paper generally is the Hindu. So most people end up reading the editorials in the Hindu and the Hindu paper as such, but there are multitude of books which would give you this awareness of current affairs. Now, how many hours do I need to study? And I would still say, again, it's a personal thing, but given the huge syllabus that the UPSC has prescribed, a minimum of 9 hours of studying a day is required. And as the exams come near, please scale it up to 12 hours a day. That's the general kind of work that a person puts in order to clear the civil service. Knowledge of one Indian language is mandatory. Generally, there's been this trend that there's an attraction towards learning foreign languages. But do learn one Indian languages, because it is mandatory and it is a qualifying paper for you to actually get into the services. I think with that, I do not have anything more to say, but if I have any questions, I will take them, and I will hope I have covered the basics of what is required in order to get into civil service. And if there are any further questions from you, I will take it, right? Let me just have a look at the questions that have come and I will answer them. Okay. One of the questions that I have says, everybody works hard and what is the guarantee, right? There is no guarantee, just like with anything else in life. The only thing is, I can't tell you that if you put in 12 hours, you're definitely going to clear. No, there's no guarantee like that. But it does help you prepare for other things in life. Studying for the UPSC, a lot of people don't get in, but they get into maybe something parallel like running coaching centers, and they're doing extremely well for themselves, right? So there are no guarantees in life, but if you do follow a timetable, if you do follow the pattern and you know how to crack this exam, the key is in knowing what to answer and how to answer it, right? You can't, the syllabus is too vast, so you need to know what it is that you need to crack this examination. To identify that, that's when most people go in for coaching sessions, right? Somebody's asked, what are the responsibilities of being an IAS officer? I think I have covered it. Salaries, yes, I have covered that portion. Whether it is on par with the private sector. Does civil services entail a lot of work pressure, especially due to political interference? Yes, it does, but it also depends upon how you handle the pressures of life. Whether it is, it's not just political interference, it might be other pressures from also, but you need to be able to handle it. I think that is part of the training that you undergo and the part of the person that you are, that you will be able to handle this, right? How can a person prepare for civil services while working at some other place? Is it possible? There are a lot of people who have done this, but it would entail, more hard work on your part. Most people generally take the year off to prepare. Maybe when you're taking the exams, it's easier to work, but the year off before that, that's when you build up the base. Most people do take off for it. But it's not unknown that people have. You just need to put in more effort, and it also depends upon the kind of jobs that you have and the working hours that are entailed from the job, right? When does the beginner start his preparation? Like I said, you need to start a year before the prelims in order to build up and slowly work yourself towards the pace of the examination. Somebody is asked whether you need to have knowledge of various topics or it has something to do with the psychology to clear the exam. There are no multiple psychology tests. It's not as if any psychological screening happens. The interview is only a personality test to assess the kind of person that you are. They're not going to make you undergo any psychology test, right? Up to the mains, it's pure your educational skills that I would call it. What you have already, you must have developed these skills across years. So it's purely that, and the interview is only a personality test. Okay, what is the best optional for scoring? Now that again depends on your aptitude. There are a lot of favorites for people, psychology, sociology, PubAd, or few of the favorites that people have. But people choose what the subject that they are passionate about and they are most confident about. You need not necessarily choose the popular subjects to clear the examinations, right? You go by what you think you are best at. It does not matter if it's not a popular subject. Okay. How to improve English speaking and writing? Now that, like I said, the UPSC can be taken in your local languages. You need to qualify only in the English paper. So it is not essential that you need to have English speaking skills only to clear the exam, right? Even your interviews are done in local languages. So ultimately it's what you are and what knowledge you hold. The language is only secondary to it. But yes, if you want to improve your English, read books, read newspapers, speak to people. That's the only way to improve your English. Pros and cons, I think I have covered that. Coaching center. Somebody has asked me which coaching center. Now, I cannot tell you which coaching center is good, but the general trend has been that people go to Delhi to study for these examinations where there are multiple coaching centers. People also clear the exam on their own. There is no necessity that you have to go to a coaching center to clear these examinations. The only advantage that the coaching centers will give you is maybe availability of all the material that you required in one place. Maybe the kind of group support that you get from people, because believe me that this 2 years of preparation is really a very lonely kind of a thing, and it's in a rat eat rat world. So people are not really going out of the way to help each other to give you the portion. So the coaching center offers you a ready-made solution to things, but it does not mean that only if you go to a coaching center you will clear the exam. Absolutely not. There are a lot of people who have made it on their own. Just make sure you have a timetable, you stick to it, you have a very logical way of approaching the paper. If you can, find a study group which will help, because you will face a lot of times you will feel demotivated. You will think, when there is no guarantee, why should I do it, right? It's at this time that you would need your support group to help pull you out of this and keep you going. So coaching centers you can check in Delhi, but a lot of the other metros also have a lot of good coaching centers. You don't necessarily have to go only to Delhi to do this. I'm sorry, I might not be able to cover all the questions that you have asked because there are too many here. So I'm just going by what I think will I have not covered in my session, right? What should be my backup plan? Somebody asks. Right now, I cannot tell you what your backup plan should be. It depends on what you want out of life, right? But those 2 years that you spend immediately writing the exam, that might be the time you will actually know what you want in life, right? You might clear the exam, you might not clear. It helps you to face failures in life as well as the successes in life. So by that time, by the time you have given at least 2 3 attempts, if you're starting off at 21, I think you would know exactly what you want to be in life, and it's very easy to move ahead from there, right? Somebody is asking me, is there a chance of ever being rich? No, I cannot answer a question like that. But the government is a well-paid job these days, and it takes care of all your needs. Government gives you housing, right? At a certain level, depending on the function, the vehicle is provided to you, and I think the government salary is more than adequate to live a luxurious life, right? Now, what you define as rich, now I do not know. Okay, somebody's asked me more about the engineering services and services for DRDO. Please look at the UPSC notifications or their websites, because I am not very clued up about what it is. I just know that the UPSC conducts these exams for entry into these services. So please have a look at the UPSC notification, right? Somebody's asked me how to improve your interview skills. Now, this is very important because interview can be make or break. There are a lot of people who conduct mock interviews for you. It's good to develop some public speaking skills also, because although you will develop it during the course of your career, it is very important when you go to an interview panel to be able to express yourself in a very clear and a logical manner, right? Sometimes our thoughts get so jumbled up, you might know everything but you'd still not be able to express it. So learning how to express your thoughts is very important. Also learning how to handle yourself, the way you carry yourself, the way you dress, right? Everything makes an impression in the interview, because the first impression, like most people say, although it might be judgmental, the first impression is always the best impression. So learn to carry yourself well, go well dressed for an interview. Please brush up on current affairs. If you have hobbies, please know more things about your hobbies. Just don't go say gardening, I like to garden, I like to plant a few things. No, please go in depth what it is required. They might question you on your hobbies, on your things that you have achieved in life. It's more of that rather than a quiz, right? It's not a quiz to ask you what you know. It's a more of who you are. That's what they're trying to assess in the interview. Somebody's asked me responsibility of a forest service officer. I'm sorry, in general what I know is they are posted as conservators or deputy conservators of forest, starting from where they are, and they are in charge of looking after the basically the notified zones, and they are to prevent poaching and smuggling of the forest goods. That's the extent to which I know, but if you need to know in detail, there are a lot of sites you can Google. Please go to UPSC or the every department has the government website for authentic information. Please go only to these government websites, because a lot of other people give a lot of information which might not really fit what the services actually are. Every department in the government has its own website. If you need to know anything more about any of these jobs, please go to those particular government websites to find your answers, right? Like somebody's asked me, any specific skills are required. Like I said, everybody in the civil service is a generalist. You build up your skill set as you progress in life, as you progress in your career, and you will build it up. And I don't do any accounting. If you honestly ask me, it's every job of the civil service is more of a managerial position, right? I might be called an accounting service, but it is taken care of by my staff. So I am basically at the first rung of leadership, wherein I will look after the affairs of the office and make sure things are happening right. So you don't need any particular skill set to actually, other than being a leader. Yes, any particular skill set to carry out any of the responsibilities of the civil service. Okay, coaching necessary, I think we have covered that. How to start studying, yes, we have covered that also. How to motivate yourself over a period, as we all know, it's a long journey. Yes, it's a very long journey. It's a very lonely journey, believe me. But what you believe in is what keeps you going, right? If you believe that you want to be where, where you plan to be, that's what will keep you going. Yes, and please do have a study group, or you do have peers who are preparing for it, because only they can understand what you are going through. There will be days you are down. Don't push yourself through those days. Take those days off, right? Give yourself time to do your favorite activities and come back with renewed vigor to study. A day off is not going to hurt anybody, right? So the the basic key to cracking this exam is to make sure you have a planned approach, right? It has to be planned and systematic. Do not just keep jumping from one subject to the other. Like in a day, if you think, yes, I need to cover this, just keep it limited to what you think you can cover, and make sure you cover it for the day, right? Don't have a vague plan and just keep proceeding. Please have deadlines. Please make sure that you know what you're going to do, and please cover what you're going to do. Don't try, as far as possible, don't try and skip timelines, because it's going to be difficult to do this, right? Just a minute. Okay, I think I just answer a few more questions, and then with that we will be winding up this session. I'm just going to quickly look at the live chat, and then any questions from there, I will take it. Okay, somebody's asked they are an engineering student. Like I said, the educational background doesn't matter. You can take the exam from any stream, right? How to improve writing skills, somebody asks. Writing skills you can only improve through repetition. Try and take a lot of mock tests, especially for the preliminary examinations. Please do take mock tests, because you need to time yourself, and you need to know that you will be able to complete the paper. Somebody is asking, can you recommend books? Now, books would depend upon what subject you choose. There are no prescribed books other than the NCERT textbooks, especially for history, geography, general science. 11th and 12th standard NCERT textbooks are what is generally prescribed by the UPSC. Right? Other than that, anything that you can read upon, anything that you find your hands on, current affairs, any topics of general interest, something that's really taking the world by storm, please keep yourself updated about everything in this. What is the percentage of people who clear the mains to the interview? In the interview, generally 2 to 3 times of the number of vacancies is what is taken. Like I said, from prelim to mains, 12 to 13 times, and for the interview 2 to 3 times the number of vacancies. People will be called for the interview, which will be held at the UPSC in Delhi. Percentage to pass, there is no percentage to pass. Like I said, it's a percentile system. So the UPSC will fix the cutoff marks accordingly. Okay, can I follow? So somebody is asking me, can I follow my passion to become an international athlete while in civil services? Definitely. Why not? Government at the lower levels employs a lot of people through the sports quota, wherein they are encouraged to play. I think the most popular example being MS Dhoni. He was employed through the railways. I think everyone knows that. You'll get multiple opportunities, not just to pursue your sporting passions. You will also get opportunities to work outside. A lot of the departments like the audits and accounts, civil accounts have deputations with the World Bank. Like my department also has a lot of tie-up with the UN peacekeeping forces. We are posted with them. So every lot of opportunities to learn. If you want to do further education, the government gives you study leave to pursue your further educational requirements. They also send you on training abroad in order to further your skills. Right, so the government job has it all, right? Just that you need to get into it and you need to have the will to get into it, right? Somebody's asked me what are the 22 languages you told. Please check the UPSC notification. The complete list of languages is given there. People are asking me if somebody is given their 100% many times and fail again. It's possible. Yes, it's possible. But like I said, it is not a reflection of who you are. There are people who I know have written the exam 6 times or 7 times and yet failed to clear it. But it doesn't matter, because I personally feel that everybody has their place in life, right? Maybe the UPSC was just a springboard for you to get on to better things in life, and it might prepare you to face better things in life and maybe give you better job opportunities elsewhere. How to collect study material? Please look at the syllabus. Along with the syllabus, sometimes a list of books are also given. You can go as per that and prepare it, or please speak to people who have cleared the examinations. If you know, they will probably have a lot of study material available with them and they might be able to share it with you. Is it too late if I am in college final year? It's definitely not too late. One question I failed to answer. A lot of people might think, if I'm in the final year and I haven't got my results yet, can I still appear for the prelims? Yes, you can. You would be required to provide proof of passing the exam at the stage of the mains examination. So even if you're in your final year and you've given your exams, you can still write the UPSC prelims at that stage. Graduation is compulsory. Yes, that is the minimum qualification. So you cannot do with a graduation. The graduation can be in any subject, and your graduation marks matter. Not really matter to a very large extent. That's what I'm going to say, because your order of merit is dependent on what you do in your mains and what you do in your interview. To a very small extent, yes. So people need not think, oh, I have been an average student, so I know it's not as if I will be, fit for civil service. Definitely not. Please don't keep that in your mind. Civil service is a completely different thing. The main thing that I would say is required is lots and lots of hard work, right? For anything to succeed in life, it's hard work is all you need. But along with the hard work, be planned, be systematic, right? Keep deadlines, work to your deadlines and give it your best. Ultimately, all that matters is that you give it your best, and that's all that anyone can do. I strongly believe that if you give your best in anything, you can still achieve what you want in life. BSc Marine Nautical Science, yes, any kind of graduation, like I said, as long as your university is a recognized university, yes, it is absolutely, you can go ahead and start applying for it. Can I pursue higher education? Yes, like I told you, a lot of learning opportunities. Yes. The number of attempts will be counted even if you're given your prelims, right? Even if you've given one paper of your prelims, it will be counted as an attempt by the UPSC. See, now people are asking, can I take this option? I'm going to tell you the optional subject is completely of your choice, right? You don't have to take the popular subjects like I told you. If you feel that your core subject is, you are good at it, please go ahead without hesitation and take it. But like I said, give a thought to the syllabus, see if you're okay with the syllabus, and then take a call on that. I think I have said, yes, interview in any language. Yes, I've already told you, you can appear in any language. Somebody is asking me, can I enter after the age of 32? As of now, there are once in a while the government opens up lateral entry, like we have just taken joint secretaries. At the lateral level, joint secretary would mean somebody who's put in a minimum of 17 or 18 years in the government, like what I am. I am at the joint secretary level currently. So there are lateral opportunities, but they're far and few in number. So the best thing to do would be to start off once you finish your college, if you're really keen on doing this. I think I have overshot my time, and I hope I have made some kind of, I've given some kind of an idea of what the civil services are. And I want to thank NPTEL once again for this, and hope you all enjoyed the session. Just before I leave, I just want to tell you, join the civil services and be the change. And every single person, whether you affect one person's life or the lives of many, you are the change and you can be the change. And that is what I would like to leave you with. Thank you very much.